As a sequel to one of my favorite visual novels ever, the Somnium Files nirvanA Initiative had a lot to live up to. The game takes the established world and characters I loved from the first game, as well as some newcomers as well, and pits them in a brand new murder mystery to solve. It delivers a mystery and overarching story that's much more grand and complex than its predecessor. While the larger scope of the narrative does lead to some disappointing shortcomings, the Somnium Files nirvanA Initiative is another superb work from writer Kotaro Ichikoshi, delivering a compelling murder mystery with funny and memorable characters, refined gameplay, and most importantly, the humor and heart that gives the series its own unique voice. But it's also a bold and ambitious sequel, one that isn't afraid to stand apart from its predecessor with the story it wants to tell, instead of just trying to mimic or one-up what came before. Just like the first game, nirvanA Initiative revolves around investigating a serial murder case. This time around, it's the half-body serial killings. 6 years ago, the right half of a corpse was found with a sign impaled into it during a game show. 6 years later, in the present, the left half suddenly appeared in a stadium with no signs of any decay. With this bizarre premise, nirvanA Initiative strives to tackle a much different kind of mystery, one that stands alone instead of just relying on the same tricks as the first game. So in a weird way, nirvanA Initiative's story is a decent entry point for newcomers, only with some references that might fly over new players' heads. There's also an option at the beginning of the game to disable any mentions of spoilers from the first game, which is an awesome addition for those who want to still go into the predecessor blind. The premise also impacts how progression works through the story. Because this is a murder that spans across 6 years, the player will be performing their investigation across the past and the present, with 2 protagonists representing each one. There's newcomer Ryuki and his AI eyeball partner Tama leading the investigation during the past, and returning character Mizuki and the first game's AI eyeball partner Aiba leading the present. While the murders lack variety thanks to the half-body motif, the hook of the story more than makes up for it by focusing its mystery in everything surrounding the murders. There's a much stronger emphasis on conspiracy theories and urban legends that run through those 6 years, and as the name implies, figuring out what exactly the nirvanA Initiative is. Going through the events of the past and present gives the game a much grander scope in the story it's trying to tackle. This also results to the narrative being a much more linear fare in comparison to previous Ichikoshi works. That's not to say the game is devoid of branching paths, but the flowchart has been scaled back considerably this time around. While I prefer the more non-linearity and the smaller, more personal story of the first, I respect the different approach to push the story in a bolder and different direction. It allows nirvanA Initiative to demonstrate its own strengths to stand apart from its predecessor instead of just retreading old ground, all while still retaining the vibe that made the first game so special, with its clever writing and batshit insane humor.
I thought that the ghost of an S&M pervert with a police uniform fetish who died in a tanning booth had come to haunt me.
However, it's this dual protagonist format that leads to my biggest criticism of the game. That being how the 2 leads aren't as fleshed out as I hoped they'd be. I adore Ryuki and Mizuki, and the game brings up very interesting ideas to push their characters, and for the most part, they are executed well, with the exception of Mizuki's relationship with a returning character feeling a tad bit flanderized, which is a massive shame since it was my favorite part of the first game. I just wish it didn't feel like Ryuki and Mizuki were battling it out for screen time, because a little extra fleshing out would have added an extra oomph these 2 needed. This extends to their dynamic with their partners as well. Ryuki and Tama bounce off each other really well, with Ryuki being overly anxious about performing well at his job, and Tama being a supportive yet stern partner, aka, and I quote, a dummy mommy.
What's the point of...
You want to talk back to the director! Don't make me throw a fucking ashtray at you!
And I enjoy Mizuki and Aiba's chaotic stupid dynamic as well.
What is this eye magician girl's special move?
I punch your abdomen repeatedly.
However, because screen time is split in half between the 2, neither of them feel fleshed out as pairs in comparison to Date and Aiba. This extends to the overall cast as well. The much grander plot, as well as a larger new cast, means some characters don't have much time to shine as I would like. And thanks to the linearity of the story, The spotlight on each character for their roots happens much later, leading to some of the more interesting developments happening in the present half. With that being said, I did eventually grow to love this new cast once all the cards were shown for their characters, and most of the minor shortcomings I had in the beginning was due to the story ambitiously trying to tackle so much. Just like the first game, there's a strong level of earnesty in how Uchikoshi writes these characters, perfectly balancing the line between insane humor and heartfelt moments. He presents them in initially absurd ways, but gives opportunities to learn about their insecurities that contextualize their eccentricity. And I love how the premise of the half-body killings works its way thematically for these characters. Most of the cast are broken, torn apart by some personal struggle. They're desperate in seeking some sort of escapism or connection with others in order to make them feel whole again. The Eye series once again demonstrates how, despite its engaging mysteries and bizarre humor, it's these sorts of human and personal conflicts that drive both the stories and characters forward to keep the player invested to see everything through.
Was it a divorce?
Yeah. She got sick of me and left the house.
As for how the game plays, the Eye series tends to have a bit more gameplay than your average visual novel, and nirvanA Initiative is no different. The game is split between investigations and Somnium sections. Investigations for the most part play exactly the same as the first game, going from location to location to investigate and talk to characters to gain more information in a point-and-click fashion. But there are two new additions added to keep things fresh. Wink Sync allows Ryuki and Mizuki to briefly read the minds of other characters, gaining a glimpse of a character's mindset on a certain topic.
It was a heat of the moment thing, but I ended up quitting my job.
The most major addition to the investigation portions are the virtual reality crime scenes. Occasionally, Tama and Aiba will show the two leads a recreation of a crime scene that they can freely walk around in. In addition, these locations can be viewed within X-ray mode as well as thermal mode, providing more opportunities to find hard-to-notice clues. I adore these sections, as the simple act of walking around a space searching for evidence adds tremendously in making the investigation feel immersive, and adds an extra layer of dimension that isn't normally possible in Eye's point-and-click style. Once all the information is gathered, it culminates to the two AI balls, forcing the protagonists to recreate what happened at the crime scene while being filmed, leading to some hilarious interactions and banter between them.
Wah! Oh no! Mr. Ryuki is tied up!
You're a really shitty actor.
Well, what did you expect?
To round out the investigations, nirvanA Initiative does have QuickTime events whenever there's an action scene. Unlike its predecessor, the comedy in these instances have been heavily toned back. They still look pretty jank, but occasionally there's a massive step up in choreography in some fights in particular. With that being said, some of the QTEs can last a tad bit long, and with no checkpoints, it can be annoying having to restart them from the beginning when making a mistake. Fortunately, there's a skip function that allows players to fast forward through scenes, so it's more of a minor inconvenience than anything.
That settles that.
Investigations are still just one tool in Eye's arsenal in progressing through the mystery. Somniums make a return in nirvanA Initiative, still requiring the protagonist to dive into the dreams of the characters in order to glean more information about the case within a 6-minute time limit. However, there are a lot of tweaks to how they play out this time around. For starters, they are much more streamlined in comparison to the first game. The amount of things that can be interacted with is much smaller, with some of the objects even only have one interaction that can be done with them. This is on top of the solutions being a lot more spelled out to the player. Quite often, Aiba and Tama will chime in stating what the objective is and where to head to next. I was initially a bit mixed on this. On one hand, it removed a lot of the randomness the first game had when finding its solutions. But on the other, these Somniums feel a bit too hand-holdy for my liking. Especially when the brand new key system, where whenever the player makes a mistake, it fills out words to complete cryptic messages relating to the character being synced, which is a good addition to provide some hints on how to progress. Despite this, I grew to appreciate some of the linearity in these sections, as nirvanA Initiative manages to inject some sort of creative gimmick into each Somnium that changes how each one is approached. They can range from being able to swim around, participating in a quiz show, or acquiring magic spells to deal with an obstacle. These add much needed variety to set these Somniums apart from each other, as it's no longer solely about the time management loop from the first game. Some of the best and most creative Somniums in the series are in the latter half of the game, and I thoroughly enjoy them to the point where I would actually look forward to playing these sections instead of disregarding them just as a means to learn more about the mystery. nirvanA Initiative also excels at tying these dream sequences to further flesh out the characters beyond just the mystery. As mentioned before, most of these characters have some sort of baggage, and there's sort of a melancholy feel within each Somnium to reflect this, even in some of the more bright and colorful ones. They explore what led these characters to feel the way they do, creating a better understanding of who these characters are and why we should care about them on an emotional level.
Damn it! Damn it! I was so close to finally forgetting. Please. Stop!
Iva?
This is all backed up by fitting music that perfectly captures the vibe of each character's dreams. The soundtrack in general is stellar across the board. While there are only a few tracks that stuck out after finishing the game, they all set the tone for their specific scenes and the overall sci-fi detective story very well. The voice acting in the game is also top-notch, which is to be expected after the previous game's fantastic performances. They all complement the bizarre yet earnest writing style of Uchikoshi, nailing the moments of hilarity on top of the moments of anguish and despair. Of course, Greg Chun once again steals the show as the legend himself, Kaname Date.
And that's that.
Presentation-wise, the game looks pretty much the same as its predecessor, with some things looking a bit more refined. Character portraits move around slightly more, and the UI has received some minor tweaks. I played with the Switch version, and the performance in general has been improved significantly compared to the first, with much less lag when loading in stuff with AI vision. With that being said, it's not perfect. There's still a bit of slowdown loading in and out of menus. Some of the hair physics are very bad, and I had the game crash on me twice. Thankfully, it autosaves often, so it did little to diminish my enjoyment. Overall, the other platforms might be the way to go if you don't want to deal with these small technical hiccups, but the portability and touchscreen support is perfect for visual novels, so going with the Switch version isn't a bad option at all. The Somnium Files nirvanA Initiative is a sequel that boldly chooses to tell a much different story than the first, with it ambitiously tackling more complex plot threads and themes. While it's this ambition that leads the narrative to not being as tight as its predecessor, the game nonetheless remains an engaging and shocking ride from start to finish, with its mystery of the half-body serial killings being filled with strange yet lovable characters, powerful themes, and more refined gameplay. The Somnium Files nirvanA Initiative is a stellar murder mystery game, and another strong work from Kotaro Uchikoshi.